President Trump is parroting Russian talking points again about Ukraine today after falsely claiming yesterday that Ukraine started the war with Russia. Just a short time ago, Trump posted a long rebuke of Zelensky on Truth Social that includes this quote: "He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he is not going to have a country left." A lot of factual problems with that post, we should note. Trump posting it just hours after Zelensky made an appeal to Trump and his team for more truth.
Unfortunately, President Trump, I have great respect for him as a leader of a nation that we have great respect for. The American people who always support us, unfortunately, lives in this disinformation space.
That appeal clearly unanswered. We have CNN anchor and chief national security analyst Jim Sciutto with us. Trump sounds like Putin.
Yeah, he is repeating Putin, right? And it's not just an overlap of talking points here from Trump and Putin. It is a mirror image of those talking points. He blames Ukraine for the war. Remind folks, Russia invaded, by the way, 2 times in 2014 and again in 2022, and it has invaded other countries in Europe, going back to Georgia in 2008. 1, he says Ukraine's to blame. 2, he gloms onto this Russian justification that it was Ukraine desiring NATO membership that caused the war, which, by the way, this began long before that was even on the table. And 3, now calling Zelensky a dictator, which, again, was another one of the justifications Putin going in. Remember, he said that Zelensky was a Nazi and created this whole Nazi threat there, which doesn't exist, and is also just an asinine point to make, given that Putin is an actual dictator, right, who killed his opponent. I mean, he goes so far as to kill his opponent, poisoning Alexei Navalny, having his spy services do that. So we now have the U.S. president endorsing Kremlin positions on this war. And listen, Republicans in Congress that I speak to, and I'm sure you do as well, know that's false, as do at least 2 of his senior advisors, because they've said so publicly, Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio, at least previously. Do they go along with this? We'll see.
I think one of the most concerning things is, and it's kind of an abstraction for so many Americans, the post-World War II world order that we've enjoyed. Yeah. People don't think about it because they've enjoyed it, right? It's sort of something they take for granted. Are we seeing perhaps a realignment?
100%. This is not just Trump apparently abandoning Ukraine, because he's been quite public, as have his senior advisors at the Munich Security Conference, for instance, that the U.S. no longer will ensure Europe's security, saying, in effect, it's your job, regardless of NATO. That is quite a move. And then more broadly, to your point here, what has largely held since World War II is this, rules-based international order. Sounds kind of boring, but to your point, it has largely kept the peace among the superpowers. Putin has violated that by invading a country to change the borders by force. And Trump is, in effect, endorsing that and moving the U.S. back from what was a bipartisan position for decades, that the U.S. supports that because it's in our interest to do so. It's not just a favor to Europe or to Asia or to other countries around the world. It's in our interests to have borders respected. And it's worked, largely. Trump seems to be saying, we're moving on.
Jim Sciutto, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Boris?
Let's expand the conversation now with Michael Bociurkiw from Ukraine. He's a former spokesperson for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Michael, thanks so much for being with us. What do you make of President Trump calling Zelensky a dictator?
Unbelievable. I never thought we would reach that day. 2 months ago, Boris, 2 months or so ago, I said there's no floor to Mr. Trump's subservience to Mr. Putin, and now we see that's playing out. These remarks are unhinged, they're divisive, and they're dangerous, and it plays exactly into Mr. Putin's narrative. Now, a hope here is that with Mr. Trump's short attention span, maybe he'll move on to another ally or enemy, but I have to make one quick point here, is that as we speak right now here in Odesa, the view is Russia right now has no solid red lines enforced by the United States. We got hammered last night with drones, and we'll see what happens tonight. But it is a very, very dire situation here because of all that.
I wonder if you think this tension between Zelensky and Trump was bound to happen, given their history. Obviously, Trump's social media post came after Zelensky said that the president lives in the disinformation space. Could this tension have been avoided?
I don't think so. I think Mr. Zelensky was working very, very hard to ingratiate himself, if we can use that term, to Mr. Trump. Remember, in Trump 1.0, it was Mr. Trump who tried to extort dirt out of Mr. Zelensky and Hunter Biden in exchange for weapons. Those are Javelin missiles. And now Mr. Zelensky has proactively gone to Mr. Trump and said, well, he probably shouldn't have said it, but he said, let's make a deal. And Mr. Trump says, okay, you're going to pay us back to the tune of $500 billion for what we've given you. So I think they did everything they could here, but extremely, extremely divisive. This could also play into the hands of opponents of Mr. Zelensky here on the ground.
I'm curious what this tells you about how the White House sees negotiations to end the war.
I don't think I think it's amateur hour, with all due respect. And, you know, the cheerleading show we saw yesterday in Riyadh, because I don't know how many times Mr. Rubio and company said Mr. Trump is the only person on earth who can solve this war. But I think what's happening here is you have all of these different so-called diplomatic lines working. General Kellogg here in Ukraine today. But at the end of the day, it's going to be Mr. Trump who decides what's going to happen. And God forbid is he acts on what he said, is that if Mr. Zelensky doesn't have elections, which is impossible to do during a war, the country could be gone. Well, if Russia comes further into Ukraine, they won't stop. They'll go into other neighboring countries, for sure.
There are clear reasons why holding elections in the middle of this war specifically would be problematic and would amplify Russia's lethal abilities. I wonder what you think about why Trump and Putin are so aligned with their view, not just of Ukraine, but seemingly of Europe as well.
You know, it's a really good question, and we've thought a lot about that. But, you know, I guess the beauty of being Donald Trump is you come into a position without any ideological baggage. So you don't care about the rules-based international order or other principles. But I have to make a quick point here in case people don't understand, is as an OSCE election observer, I can understand why you don't have elections right now, because they become targets, electoral posts for the Russians. And the other thing, with millions of Ukrainians overseas, there's no way that the U.S. embassies can handle that flow of voters for a credible election.
Michael Bociurkiw, we'll leave the conversation there. Thank you so much for sharing your point of view.
Thank you.